Hi, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the panel on photography, conceptual horizons. I'm just going to move right into the panel because all of you have been so generous coming here this morning, and I know we're hungry and want to get some lunch. So let me just begin with a very brief introduction of our wonderful artists on this panel. We'll go in the order that it's listed in the booklet. Fariba Salma Alam is a Brooklyn-based visual artist who creates small-scale installations. Her work has been shown extensively, including at the Museum of Contemporary Art Shanghai, the Queen's Museum, the Asia Society, the inaugural Brick Biennial, amongst numerous other venues. Pradeep Dalal is a Mumbai-based artist based in New York. His solo show is currently on view at Sala Diaz in San Antonio. He's a co-chair of photography at the Milton Avery Graduate School of the Arts at Bard College, and he directs the Andy Warhol Foundation's Art Writers Grants program. Priyanka Dasgupta is an artist from India with an interdisciplinary and interdiscursive art practice who lives in New York and teaches at New York University and the City College of New York. Her work has recently been exhibited at the Asian Arts Initiative in Philadelphia, the Abrams Art Center, the Changjiang Museum of Contemporary Art, and the Queen's Museum. And Alan D'Souza is a California-based multimedia artist. Their work has been shown extensively in the US and internationally, including at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C., the Guangzhou Biennale, the California Museum of Photography, and the Guangzhou Triennial in China. D'Souza is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Art Practice at UC Berkeley. And finally, Yamini Nair is a visual artist based in New York. Nair has held residencies at a variety of different venues, and her work has also been seen extensively. She teaches photography in New York City, and I'm Bakira Kamani. I teach in the English department at Swarthmore College. In the hope of Philadelphia. In the hope of inviting conversation with the audience, I'm just going to time everyone at 7 minutes and flag you down when you have 1 minute left, and then we'll just get to it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Fariba. I have up on the screen actually an image of Jayshree, if you haven't figured that out already. But this was something I dug up out of, speaking of archives, my own archive. It's from 2004, and it's a small play on a colonial British photograph. It was a plate called The Courtesan, and she may not remember, but we played around with this and did a version called Courtesan Queens 2004. I think later she asked me to change the name, but I can't remember what it was called. Anyway, for as long as I can remember, from the time I was given my first camera, looking and viewing, followed by a visual reconstruction within the lens, in the darkroom, or in collage and tile making, have been methods for self-determination, refuge, and freedom. The female form within photography and painting, and within the colonial, post-colonial, and American history, has served as a location of my understanding of societal absence, loss, violence, and ascension. Whether shooting the Indio Day festivities at South Street Seaport in the late 90s, or capturing my female friends in college the night before a crit, or working in Bangladesh, documenting acid burn survivors. I've been concerned with the representation of women and the way that they situate themselves in space. I've also been concerned with the way that they activate the unsettled space around them. These are all from Bangladesh. It's about 1999. Self-portraiture began to serve as a secret process through which I would begin to locate myself in both subterfuge and revelation. As I parsed through the historical underpinnings of photography as a tool for anthropological categorization and my own personal racial, religious, and spiritual markers. I sought a place for possibility. And this was referred to a little bit in kind of the previous talks as the third space or liminal space. And I've often thought about it as an in-between space where new cultural identities are formed, reformed, and constantly in a state of being. In my current practice, I collapse a broad spectrum of the photographic tradition, whether it's personal, anthropological, or digital. Religious allegories and secular stories, often from Islamic mythology, make their way in. This piece is called The Night Journey, and it's actually made out of ceramic tiles. Although I've also played around in the past with forms of architecture that are fragmented and split up the body. So repetition has also been a big part of my work, kind of playing off the Islamic concept of repeating tiles as a way to demarcate space and patterns to create rhythm. And I'm also influenced, again, the name here, Night Journey, is a reference to something I think came up with in a previous panel, which is a journey that the Prophet Muhammad takes from Mecca to Jerusalem that is somewhat perceived as political, at least in Persian miniature painting. This piece is called Send Me a Telegram. And in this piece, I mean, with many of my pieces, the starting point is always a photograph. And in this case, it was actually a photograph of my father's from 1959. Our family actually came to Canada in 1958. So within my family alone, we have a pretty extensive archive of salvations. So I also collapsed this image with images of my own. So using birds, archival images. And really the idea here was to collapse space and time into this imaginary or fantastical landscape. I wanted to share this installation shot so that you could see the way in which I also use like reductive forms to create this outer form or kind of concept of continuity. This is another piece that starts with the photographs from my family's archive. It's from Lexington, Massachusetts in 1980. And I never really knew who this woman was. And I played around a bunch and I decided that this is where she belonged, kind of in the middle of the mosque. There's a beer beside that minaret. Skip through this one. This is a piece called Alongside Her Utterances. This is a piece that actually starts, the starting point is a photograph of my own. It's these birds in silhouette, as you can see in the big frame. And what I was thinking a lot about here is the concept of script and scripture and how much weight that carries or marking before we even know what it says. And I abstracted the birds in this way to create my own scripture. There's also an image of a young girl from, speed it along, from my family's wedding photographs that's never been identified. We don't know who she is. I started having patterns come off the wall and thinking about animal as sort of placeholder for the female body. So real quick, these are collages, again, based on photographs. This one is called Head Maps. This one is another version of head maps. I was interested in depicting the body in this sort of flight, but also in a cold, still place. This is Moonlight into Marzipan. Again, self-portraits, collage, blueprints. And I'll leave you with this. It's called Antelope. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to just present a artist book that I just made. It was just printed a few weeks back in Mumbai, and an exhibition that kind of came, which is based on this little book that I made on Bharat Bhavan in Bhopal. This is a different project from the way I normally work. I mean, I made the artist book first over the last 2 years, and then did an exhibition, and I'll show you a few installation shots from that, and then kind of printed the book after the exhibition, so it's a little awkward. But I'm showing you just some images from the book. The book was an examination of this museum done by architect Charles Correa in Bhopal in the 80s. And it was the first to have folk art, tribal art, and contemporary modern art all in the same grouping. So the architecture kind of reflected the ideas of the founder, Jagdish Swaminathan, who championed the outsider and tribal art as being equivalent of contemporary art. So my book project kind of triangulates between this model, between Correa's attempt to make a different architecture from the Corbusian model around the idea of courtyards and open-air spaces, and the art of Jangar Singh Sham, the tribal artist who was discovered or found by Swaminathan and nurtured at Bharat Bhavan, and the drawings, the language drawings of the Korwa tribals. So I had worked in Correa's office in the late 80s, and I was aware of these buildings, but I went back to them only recently and slowly started to piece things together, both in terms of the art and the architecture kind of together. So I had hoped to find a modest publication on the Korwa drawings that Swaminathan had put together in the 80s, but the book was not even there at the Bharat Bhavan. So I had to work with another publication that they had there that they made Xerox copies of for me. And I kind of came back to New York and I found both the publications in the library at Columbia and at the New York Public Library. So I was interested in this kind of motion between finding things in India and then finding things here, and kind of worked between both the Xeroxes and the high-res scans that I was able to make here. I'll just go through a couple of pages of the book. That's a picture of Jangar Singh Sham that I kind of reworked on the scanner. I also was interested that somebody of Jangar Singh Sham's stature, as well as the Korwa tribals, there are no really full-on catalogs of their work. So I used the kind of inventory of 75 works each that the Bharat Bhavan had in their museum as a kind of catalog raisonné that won't actually happen, probably. And so there are two halves of this book. One starts from the book Perceiving Fingers, which is Swaminathan's book, which is a collection of the Bharat Bhavan. And the other half is the language drawings, as you see, of the Korwa tribals. The black and white photographs are photographs of the architecture that I had made in Bhopal. I was very interested in completing this project to find that what are the fluid ways that objects, books, bodies, and ideas circulate and recirculate in the world? Like, what do we find there, what do we find here, and the kind of interaction between the two. I wrote a small text that goes as an insert in the book And then this is the installation at Sala Diaz in San Antonio, where I kind of laid out two halves of the book and in exact replica Xeroxes that go around the room. And then above that are larger photographs that are actual photographic prints. And I was interested again in copies and how one understands images both in their most casual form and then in a much more attentive form. So I tried to play with that, and again to break the sequences to kind of only register some images, but you'll get an idea of how the book came together. I also had a chance, besides the images that are in the book, like that little drawing that you see on the top right, I experimented with making line drawings based on the tribal drawings and then kind of rescanned and rephotographed those objects. So I was interested in kind of messing with my own language of architectural training that I had in school that was kind of ripped off from the Bauhaus models of grids and drawings, and I was trying to kind of make that or destabilize it in some way, in the way that I made this project. This is, and then along with that I included other work like this, which are kind of scanner pieces where I'm scanning in real time on a scanner with photographs both that are personal, including student visits to these sites, and then what you see in the top bit is a Jangar Singh Sham drawing that I'd also found. I'm going to just say that again, this repetition, copying, and research is a kind of circling around something many times in order to kind of inscribe an experience more deeply, and that's something that I've been really interested in. I guess that is part of our own displacement of having lived in India and then living here. I know we were asked to speak a little bit about conceptual photography and our own role in it, and I'm just going to end with two examples. I'm not going to show you the images, but I'm admiring these projects, but I'm not claiming that for my own work. But one is a project that was shown by Zoe Leonard a couple of years ago at MoMA called Analog, in which she reworks the idea of grids in this much more loose and mobile fashion. And it was something, again, that I thought that there's a kind of a queering of conceptual art practices and messing with it or a way of shifting it. And another project that I've also really admired over the years is Louis Kamnitzer's Memorial, which some of you might have seen at Alexander Gray a couple of years back, where he takes digital images of the phone book from Montevideo, Uruguay, and he reinserts names of the people who had disappeared as part of the regime. So again, it's a very different kind of project, but I am interested in how a kind of conceptual practice can have a more political and a more political bite and a way of transforming a form that is taking on the administrative apparatus in some way, at least in Kamnitzer's project. So I just want to end with those two examples. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. I'm made up of many different halves, so I'm not going to list them. Like Aruna was talking about her daughter earlier. I'm going to talk just a little bit about a current body of work that I'm developing right now, which includes photography, but also works with, includes installation, video, sculpture, and is being created in collaboration with my husband, who's also sitting in the back with Shagun's husband. So the work essentially is titled Where Straight Lines Fail, and it essentially speaks to it takes its point of departure from Vivek Ball's book Bengali Harlem. He's also sitting here, and and draws initial inspiration from the lost histories of Bengali sailors who passed as black in the early 20th century in order to circumvent the laws against Asian immigration at the time. And through reading that book, it started out as a personal interest because I'm Bengali and I live in Harlem. But through reading the book and becoming familiar with these histories, I started to think a lot about how each and every one of us passes as many different things during the course of a day, during the course of a week, during the course of a month, and the challenges as well as the privileges of passing or the desirability of passing, and also started to think about this work in terms of disrupting conventional notions of what the word means in the United States, because when it's used, it's predominantly seen as a word that speaks to someone who is passing as white, because white equals desire and white equals privilege. But these are histories of people who passed as black in order to be able to live in the United States. And so through this initial introduction to this history, I started to look also at other examples of blacks passing as Indians during the 1940s and 50s in the US, because by channeling the desirability of the stereotypical exotic Eastern man, I also started to I came across the travels of one of my grandfather's sculptures, which had disappeared in India in 1991 and reappeared in Tucson, Arizona, passing as a planter in 2016. So I started to think a lot about the parallels between human passing and object passing, and the ease with which an object might take on multiple identities over a period of time while we remain contained, or the restrictions with human identity, the way that we are compartmentalized. So in terms of photography, I use photography as a medium, but I also think very specifically about, my main interest lies in the history of the photographic image as power, and really thinking about what that means, like what it means to deal with the photographic image as with its historical influence or significance as a document. And so even though the work exists as an installation, I think of it as an image that is actually three-dimensional, that you walk through and navigate and think about all of these layers of construction and staging as you negotiate the work. So these are images of videos that are within the work. This is an image of postcards that I also use in my work as takeaways to share or circulate stories that I am investigating in terms of these lost histories. I also work with tactics that were historically used by those that have access to power in order to use it in order to appear more desirable or more powerful, specifically looking at images of India from the British Empire, where the British embellished images of themselves in order to appear more painterly and thus valuable, or in order to appear more like the Mughal Empire and thus more legitimate as a ruling power in the country. So these are tactics that are deliberately used in the work in order to draw attention to the construction of the photograph and destabilize these assumptions that we make in terms of truth and fact and document, in order to draw attention to the fact that the image has always been used as a location of staging and of construction in order to perpetuate a certain kind of interest, and along the lines of which many histories have then been marginalized and lost. And so for those of us who love the notion of living in between these lines, these straight lines that invariably in my mind fail, it becomes really exciting to think about how to appropriate these tactics of power and think about, and not just to visualize how they are used to manipulate the audience, but also to engage in thinking around like the playfulness of them, and through the playfulness, the potential of perpetuating life or enabling survival. So these are some of my resource images from where a lot of my thinking comes. This specifically, I'm going to end with this image, which is an image from 1858 from Sikandarabad, and it's one of the most important images of the British Empire in India, and the British used it to perpetuate and legitimize their rule in order to, as a show of power, showing all of these skeletons of supposedly Indians who had been massacred by their army to quell the revolt of 1857. But it was later discovered that all the skeletons in the bag were actually sourced from outside and staged and placed, and the photographs actually from an entire year after the Sepoy Mutiny or the revolt of 1857 had ended. And so photography has been staged right from its inception. And so that's one of the things that I'm really, really interested in. Thank you.
Is this on? So, I can't tell if this is on. I want to do a number of different things in my 7 minutes, and since I'm ad-libbing, I'm not sure how much I'm going to remember, and I'll try not to fall off the stairs at the same time. But I wanted to go back to the image. So you all have this, presumably, and so I want you to refer to this cover and also to the image that will be on the screen. Yes, okay. So just as a kind of intro, just a thought about documentary, and this is called Conceptual Horizons, and the other photo panel was Photography, Document and Archive. And so there have been times when I've called myself a conceptual photographer, and more recently I felt it's more important to call what I do a documentary project. And we think of documentary as what gets recorded in front of the lens. And I think of my practice as definitely a record of something, but it's not necessarily of the thing depicted. But what I'm interested in, how the photograph then functions as a document out in the world. So just as a kind of intro to these two images. So these are my photographs that I've taken. And here I want to step outside of them and not claim them as mine. Because they appear, on the brochure and also on the screen without my name. So they're actually, they've been dislocated from me. So I'm going to do the critique them, since all of you are too polite to do that. But I want to consider, how these function as documents, both on the screen and on the cover here. And so it's the whole thing as an image, really, including the words. And so, we have fatal love, where are we now? And then also here, lucid dreams and distant visions. And so I want to consider what the photograph embedded within the larger image means in relation to these texts. So, fatal and then fatal love, so love, and then where are we, and then now, and then in relation to lucid dreams and distant visions. So we're getting a number of different plays around location, where are we, and then the idea of a distant vision, and then also questions around time. Okay, so now. And then dreams, the idea of dreams taking place not in a here and now, or not in a kind of locatable present, but in a kind of amorphous time. And yet they're lucid. Okay, so they have some claim to the real. And you know, what do these different terms, the terminologies, mean in relation to this larger question we're asking about South Asian art? What does it mean to be South Asian? Or what does it mean to call certain kinds of art South Asian? So I guess in this image, there's a kind of partitioning. I know that's a loaded term, but you know, there's a kind of series of verticals. Yeah, sorry about that. Which divide the figures, so we're getting a generational split. You know, like there's three generations. You know, and so there's a play on time, and clearly a Muslim family, and you know, so like who are the we in the where are we now? And if this is where we are, like where is that? I mean, where the hell is that? And for most of you, if you've read actually it doesn't say, does it say? There is a caption on the inside cover. The caption just says Rumpty Dumpty. Unless you read the description or see the image inside the brochure, you wouldn't necessarily know where it is. But what does it mean to, Asia Society? What does it mean for Asia Society to use this as a publicity image, as a representation of South Asianness? Whereas my intention is not really is an overriding factor, because the work is now into the world and functioning as a document in the world. But certainly my sort of intention, or partly the things I'm interested in, is what are the representations of South Asianness, regardless of who's taken this image. And anyone could have taken this image. And so there's a fantasy of South Asianness being produced in New Jersey, Atlantic City. And yes, it's the Taj Casino, the Trump Taj Casino. So what does that mean now? Where Trump has produced a fantasy of South Asianness, which he's now using as an economic factor for his own business alliances. Okay. And how do we participate in that? So there's a fantasy, which is, you know, is that a lucid dream? Was it a distant vision? Or it's a vision of distance, which is now brought here and now. And so, you know, these are some of the questions that I think you can follow with any artwork. And for me to think of this as a document that now goes into the world, that operates so differently, both that has the possibility of representing the multiplicity, I won't use binary or duality, the multiplicities, that's why we don't use that word, of different perspectives, and I think they're conflicting perspective, because we're also being represented, and represented in ways that are used against us. And so how do we as artists, but also, as Kanishka said, just because I'm a person, how do we as persons and people actually engage with those representations, both for and against, through a single image? And I think one of the things about being an artist is that your own images, despite your intentions, also then, as they function in the world, actually misrepresent you. And that's not the fault of anyone or of an institution. That's the way how images function. But it's our duty as viewers and practitioners to examine the way that these now function as documents in the world, and to really take them apart, not celebrate them as easy representations of us, not think of them only as dreams, because deep dreams have, if they come into the world, have material consequences. Not to think of them as distant things from over there, because again, those have material consequences. And also the fantasy of a previous era, which is now being used to construct us in the present. Okay. I think I'm through. That's my name.
Hi. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to Jayshree and Prerna for this brilliant weekend and everything you do. My name is Yamni Nair, and I am an artist who works at the intersection of photography, sculpture, and installation. So I'm going to speak a bit about my process and the themes that are central to my work and the ways in which my process informs these themes. My practice is primarily studio-based, in which I essentially build my images by hand, meaning my photographs are documents of studio-based installations on tabletops or on floors and walls, made from found and raw materials, wood, styrofoam, and photographic material. And once a set of images is made, the installation is destroyed, leaving the image as the sole entry point, object, and document. It's this tension that I'm most interested in. And the image that is brought into public space is not necessarily always the last one made, so it gives a different sense of time and progress. I work in this way because I'm deeply interested in our expectations of the image, how photography mediates space, what translates through the two-dimensional space of the photograph, and what is lost, as well as being interested in how a psychic space moves between mediums, the sculpture, the photograph, the gallery space. Central to my work are the built environment, its representation, and its relationship to identity, cultural, social, and historical. So I'll begin by showing an older body of work. This series, titled Displaced Persons Colony, is based on private spaces, domestic interiors found between the US and Chittaranjan Park, New Delhi. This work is deeply informed by personal narrative. CR Park is where my family relocated after leaving East Bengal post-partition. Chittaranjan Park was originally called Displaced Persons Colony, and the name only changed in the 1980s. The images present fictional interiors that are without location, and instead explore place as a hybrid of narrative, myth, and memory, as metaphor, and as psychological space. While a sense of non-locatedness permeates the work, formal elements create a cohesiveness within the body of images, color and repetition of objects throughout the photographs. And so this is one of the images from that series. Through the act of making, the vocabulary and themes that inform my practice have developed through time. Architecture and the built environment are central, how it shapes us, how we shape it, and specifically thinking about modernism in architecture as a dominant narrative. I explore alternate modernities, paths not taken or not represented, and the problem of identity through time. A lexicon of modernist architecture, which is based on sameness, repetition, and the transparent, becomes a pivot point for my own investigations into otherness, difference, opacity, and the unique object. Texture and materiality are central and communicate in ways that are traditionally found in the realm of sculpture rather than photography. And the hand plays a huge role and underscores labor. I engage with temporality in order to animate the photographic medium. So this is a series of called Unform and Growth, and it documents a space that changes by my hand through time, and also sort of engages in the dialogue with abstraction. So I'll just show you a few images from these, from this body. I think that one was shown already. An exploration of interiority and psychological space drive my practice, as well as scale, the intimate, and the spectacle. And ultimately, the acts of translation and abstraction. I work with historical archives, and my installations are often based on source images. Key questions for me are, what is difference? What is illegibility? What does it mean to be opaque? What is visible, invisible, illusory? And how can we speak of the body? How does the body occupy space? How is it absent? How does it remain present? How do we move through and leave our traces? How do we abstract space? So within my practice, I also create smaller studies that serve the same function as a sketchbook. So these are usually black and white and are printed 11 by 14, and I have many of these. And they're a form of thinking for me. So I've just gathered a few to show you. And the final works, my large-scale color works and smaller studies are presented in unison as a parallel to the studio and an invitation to the viewer into the process. So these are joined in the public space in the gallery as installation. And these are all handmade, hand-built images of sculptures. And these are, this is actually two images from my last solo show here in New York, An Axe for a Wingbone. So you can see one example of an installation. I also do book projects. So I recently did a book project for the curator-editor Shanai Javeri. His book publication Chandigarh is in India. And so I just have a few pages that I've extracted from that. So my photo essay was called What We Look For. And so for those of you who know me from my performance days, you might appreciate that I got back to writing in this essay that combined my photographs from the city of Chandigarh, Punjab itself, and studio-based constructions and abstractions. So I'll just read a bit from that essay. I walked miles through roads that led to the city after having heard from countless sources of its origins. Concrete slabs resembled sticks held upright by gravity in turn held fast to its roots. Thick gray matter packed itself into the geometry of the museum, the capital, the residences. Its roots tied to our lives in ways that run familiar, the present, a double mind belonging to our own and our grandparents' future. But this is a place, a city built from numbers, lines and models, and breathing through structures. We fight for openings, but closure is a language through which we hesitantly whisper progress. And I wonder if what I am looking for was already found in the piles of prints that lie dormant in basements and storage bins, in the studios of architects, the libraries of institutions, in the archives of a geographical remove. And so I'll just close with a current project that I'm working on now. And in this project, I'll be translating photographs and images into actual materials, glass, metal, and stone. And the project is for the US Embassy in New Delhi, and I'll be conducting site visits this fall. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for your really brilliant and thought-provoking conversations. I'm going to hand the mic over to the audience in case anyone has a question that they'd like to ask this panel of artists.
Thank you. My question is for Alan, although I welcome responses from everyone. But Alan, I'm thinking about this image again. This is back on the screen. And you said something that really struck me about this, the creation of this fantasy of South Asia in New Jersey. And I was thinking, well, this is one version of the fantasy of South Asia in New Jersey, but we all know there's another fantasy of this. There's a fantasy of South Asia that South Asians are producing for themselves in New Jersey. And this image also, to me, speaks to that in some way, but it also contradicts that in some way, particularly because you're looking at this kind of icon of Indianness, but it's one of the icons that comes from a period of, great Muslim influence in culture, and you're looking at also a Muslim family. And I think there is a sense in which we have to also confront that question of what is the fantasy of South Asia that South Asians are producing in New Jersey, and how is that related to the fantasy of South Asia that South Asians are producing in South Asia? And, in this case, I'm thinking very specifically of the challenging of, say, the Taj Mahal as a symbol of India in favor of more Hindu symbols. So I wonder if you could speak to how we can understand these productions of fantasy, multiple productions of fantasy, and how they intersect and how they reinforce each other, how that might happen in productive ways, and also how it might happen in very destructive ways. Thank you.
More than 1 minute. Well, I hope in the gallery space itself that the three images in a sequence that might interrupt an easy reading of the fantasy. So the first image is of the Trump Taj casino without any people, and so it's difficult, just that image, to locate where it is. So in some ways it fulfills that fantasy. And also, because of the lack of people in it, it can read as different time periods, except there's a fairground in the background, which sort of complicates it a little bit. And then the second image, does have, it is this image with a Muslim family. And then the third image is where it gets revealed as the Trump Taj Casino. There's the name, and there's a figure walking away from it. And of course, politically, we're going to read this image so differently from when it was shot in '97. So, and that's the date of the print, 1997 to 2017. To let the viewer know that it's photographed at a particular moment. It's viewed now, 20 years later, and I didn't clean my negatives when printing, so that it has the 20 years of dust. So to allow the surface of the print itself as a kind of interruption of the fantasy, just through I guess the visuality of the dust surface. And I think in some ways as an artist I'm sort of having to trust viewers to not to escape the fantasy, because it saturates us and saturates all the sort of mediascape that we function in, but that there are ways to interrupt it. And I have to rely on the viewer to do that for themselves rather than say this is how you have to do it.
Can we have one more question for the panel?
I've often been a little conflicted about the term conceptual photography as versus documentary. And so, Ellen, you've been on both panels. I'm thinking of the little book, 26 gas stations, and how crappy that is produced, and this sort of tradition of conceptual photography of almost using the abject reproduction of the image as a marker for, yes, this is conceptual, you're not supposed to, read it on a sensual level. And I'm curious about, the thoughts of any of the panelists on how that functions within your practice, where you're sort of purposely not creating this beautiful, big, sensual, luscious print. And I know some of you do work in that way, but others seem to, subvert that and, kind of use the more intellectual reading of an image. Why that happens, and how you use that in your work.
I hope I understand your question, but I think the question was where the line between the conceptual understanding of photography and the luscious image line.
Yeah, it said some of you do kind of take one side or the other, and I'm really interested in that split. And
I honestly don't see a side. I mean, I don't know if I'm just speaking for myself, but I don't really see a side that we're taking. I think this panel also happened, at least for me, the way I thought through it, it does happen in conversation with the panel from yesterday as well. In fact, I thought a lot about, like, why am I in this panel? Should I be in that panel instead? Because I do work, I think consciously about the archive and the photograph as a document, and then choose to destabilize it using some of the tactics that have been used historically, and then drawing attention to the construction of the image. But I think the reason that we're all here today is to find ways to talk about our practice and also find through lines that connect our practices. So I think what might be a really interesting way to kind of jump into this question would also be to think about where I don't even see if one ends and the other begins, but how I think they work hand in hand throughout.
I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, in terms of the sort of photography, the print it's like the part two, right? And that's sort of, it's integral to the articulation and the way in which an image is read, in terms of being on the wall. It's something I've thought about a lot in my practice, because I work like in large scale color photographs, but I think that, there's a real economy around images, photographic images, and the kinds of consumption we have around images and slickness, and I think for me in my practice, I'm interested in kind of drawing attention to that, but also subverting it in a sense. So the materiality and the viscerality within, that wouldn't be necessarily associated in a photograph. I think that I try to push that, or just question, what are our expectations of a photographic print?
That's it, time's up.
No, but I think that if you're putting a print on a wall, it's integral, right, to the reading of the image. That it's, Actually,
I wanted to just add that, aesthetic is also a very large territory, and I think that the kind of hierarchy of a large format, large print, as being aesthetically higher than the Edrochet prints that were printed by a printer is kind of a false dichotomy. I mean, I don't think that we all operate with one level of an aesthetic language. And I feel that as artists we operate, depending on the project or the idea, to have as large a range of aspects in your toolbox as you can. But I personally feel that those images, or at least the lo-fi images, are also a way to kind of calm down or to kind of slow down the optics of like high-resolution Stephen Shore or Jeff Wall kind of images that we become so accustomed to. And there is a whole history around the production of those images that is also to be part of the calculation. Like if Jeff Wall can spend 6 months in a large production thing, which is like a movie, to make one image, why are we considering that to have a higher value by itself?
Sure. If I can just say quickly, I mean, and that history, it has so much to do with the need for photography to challenge painting back in the day, right, in the 70s, and be accepted on a certain level. And I think now with the proliferation of smartphones and digital cameras, you know, there's such a conversation and multiplicity around quality. And like I photograph, you know, with digital camera, but also large format camera. But it brings about an interesting question. Yeah.
I think for me, I've always, you know, and also coming from a pretty traditional photographic background, I've always thought of photographs as fake news. So there's never really been, you know, what is real and what isn't. There's so many micro choices that go into just even from the beginning of exposing it on film or now in digital that are immediately taking it out of any kind of like document as reality. So, you know, that being kind of the starting point, I think everything we're doing is false and everything we're doing is real.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only difference between documentary and conceptual photography is that conceptual photography calls attention to its modes of production. Whereas documentary photography, at least as, you know, how it's conventionally conceived, there's the pretense of it just happened. You know, to try and create a kind of veneer or remove attention of that this is actually a photograph you're looking at. Right? So you pretend that you're looking at an actual scene rather than you're looking at a photograph. And conceptual photography just brings attention that this is a photograph, this is an object. That's the only difference.
It's the dust, right?
Thank you so much, and please join me in a round of applause for this amazing. Is it time for lunch?
Yes, and thanks to the moderator for letting us be on time. So lunch is readiness upstairs. Originally, we